Today I'll show you what the average wealth in Germany will be in 2026 for each age group from 16 to 75 years old, and how much yours should be if you want to be able to live off it later on. And no matter when you start, you'll unfortunately find yourself above the average very quickly because the situation in Germany is actually a bit worse than it was a few years ago. And with that, welcome to Northern Finance. My name is Alex Bleck.
Hi, my name is Alex from Northern Finance. This video was translated with the help of AI so that we can reach more people in their own language. A native speaker has reviewed the translation. Still, some sentences might sound a little unusual. Thanks for being here and enjoy the video now.
Yes, the average in Germany is 1.35 children per woman, 10 hours of internet use per day, 3 hours of television per day, 80 grams of sweets, and 0.25 liters of beer per day. And as you can clearly see from these average values, especially when it comes to daily internet usage, you might feel good in the moment, but spending 10 hours every day on the internet isn't necessarily good for us in the long run. And the average isn't always what you might want to achieve in your own life. That's exactly why today we're going to take a slightly different look at these figures and where they truly should be so that you can get much more out of your life. Today we'll be looking at both the average values and the median values. While the median, the exact middle value of all the numbers, can often be a bit more realistic, the average is certainly not a bad metric either, but it tends to give a somewhat disproportionately inflated figure for the actual average, because of a few particularly wealthy individuals. If ECB President Christine Lagarde had participated in the Bundesbank's surveys, which are the primary sources used here, her annual salary of €726,000 gross last year would have substantially skewed the average upwards. And we're using the most recent data from the Bundesbank, which was published in 2023 and 2025, and we're also adjusting this data for inflation since the original survey. The links to the sources are also down in the video description, and now let's get started, I'd say. First, we have the 16 to 25-year-olds. Here, in 2026, the average wealth is €50,263, which is a lot for this age group. Here you can clearly see again that a few very wealthy people pull the average up significantly, because if you're studying or in training, you can only save a little money, obviously since you're already investing in your own education. The median, at €14,174, is therefore much more realistic. But what if you're not satisfied with the median? What are good wealth goals at this age to become partially or even fully financially independent? At the lower end, you should have around €16,000, so a bit more than the median. In the middle, you're looking at €25,000 just so that the habit of saving is established. At the upper end, you should have €40,000, and if you're already earning and saving a lot, you'll need between €125,000 and €25,000. These amounts may seem far off at first, or maybe even impossible if you're just starting out, but to be fair, you can still catch up very quickly in later years. By the way, to arrive at these figures, we took the average and multiplied it by 0.3, 0.5, 0.8, and 2.5 for the top end. Since the average is skewed upwards by the wealthy, these are good values to keep things realistic, but also to achieve a solid passive income in the end, which is the goal for many. I'll show you the best way to get started as a beginner in this video here, which I've linked for you in the info card and also below in the video description. That brings us to the period between ages 25 and 35 when you can really step on the gas, not just in your career and building wealth, but also with personal goals like starting your own family, for example. The average wealth in Germany up to age 35 is $226,000, while the median is only €30,000. Here again, you can see why it's so important to always look at both values. If you haven't reached the median net worth yet, or maybe you have some debts, there is no need to panic, because it's not too late to change your situation. Feel free to take a look around here on Northern Finance. We really have a lot of videos that can help you take your first steps toward building wealth. Good financial goals for this age are to have successfully accumulated about €74,000 at the lower end, and around €113,000 in the middle. If you manage that, just through compound interest alone, you'll have more by age 65 than most Germans, since your wealth will then be at €649,000 by the time you retire. At the upper end, the goal is €181,000, and at the very top, €565,000, where with compound interest and the historical performance of the stock market, you would end up with over €3 million, and that's after taxes. Yeah, it's pretty crazy how much you can achieve here if you really go all in at the beginning. During this particular phase of your life, it really helps to keep your lifestyle inflation in check. and not let yourself be tempted to unnecessarily spend more and more just because you are steadily earning more. Secondly, it really helps if you have no debts by the age of 35, apart from your own property, because then you can fully focus on building your own wealth. Now let's move on to the period from 35 to 45 years old. Here, the average is 364,000 euros and the median is 95,000 euros. Good targets are reaching around 120,000 euros at the lower end, 182,000 euros in the middle, and at the upper end 291,000 euros with 910,000 euros at the peak. And as you can see here, the difference in the middle between age 35 and 45 is actually not that big. That's only 69,000 euros, which you can reach very quickly in 10 years, not just through contributions, but also thanks to compound interest. So if you were able to save a lot early on, you almost automatically move further to the right in this table, towards the upper end and the peak. It now becomes easier and easier for you to build up real wealth and live significantly better than most Germans. Because what is also important is that this survey makes it clear that the wealth of Germans has actually shrunk in real terms after deducting inflation in recent years. Since 2017, it has still grown, but because inflation was so high in 2020, 2021, and 2022, the whole thing has actually shrunk in real terms up to today. At this stage of life, it helps to pay off as much of your house as possible if you have financed a house or property, and secondly, to know how much wealth you really need by the time you retire. According to the 4% rule, and with a goal of 1 million euros, you could have 40,000 euros in additional retirement income for life, without actually depleting your capital. I've also left a compound interest calculator for you in the video description below. There you can find out for yourself how much wealth you'll have by retirement and whether it's enough to live on. And I share my journey to financial freedom here on the channel every month with real numbers in my portfolio update showing everything I have. Recently, we also hit a huge milestone of 1,000 euros in passive income per month. If you want to follow me on my own journey, which I document transparently here, leave me a like and subscribe. Let's continue with ages 45 to 55. Here, the average is 641,000 euros and the median is 250,000 euros. At the lower end, you should have about 211,000 euros by this point, 320,000 euros in the middle, 513,000 euros at the upper end, and at the very top 1.6 million euros. That's an amount at which most people could stop working. 4% of that is 64,000 euros per year, which corresponds to a good salary that also increases by 3.6% each year, which should fully offset inflation. At this age, it makes sense to broadly diversify your portfolio and simply reduce individual positions in the portfolio so that they can't determine when you retire. That's basically the reason. Broadly diversified ETFs are essential here, and if you don't use individual stocks, I wouldn't invest in any more either, just diversify as widely as possible. And finally, let's move on to the period up to age 65. Here, the average is 578,000 euros and the median is 295,000 euros. As you can see here, the average gradually shrinks down compared to the previous 10 years, and it continues to do so when we look at the data for older individuals. Since many people then enjoy their wealth or have to pay for necessary medical treatments and other things, and so the total amount keeps steadily decreasing over time. For our calculation here, that's enough for now. As I said, if you were on track with your wealth goal by age 35, had already achieved that, and then continued to save normally each year, let's say 5,000 euros, which is not that much, you will very quickly end up with more than 1 million euros in wealth after taxes, which is significantly more than the average and the median. You can see once again that starting early really pays off. Of course, you can still do it later, but you simply have an unfair advantage, so to speak, if you can save a lot early on. That way, you end up with much more than the median and much more than the average. In the years after that, meaning up to 75 and over 75, all the values continue to decline. At this point, the wealth is being used up as it should be. You want to enjoy life and actually benefit from your money, not just accumulate interest. That's why we won't continue this calculation any further, since most people want to retire by 65 at the latest. Anyone who has reached this age should further reduce their risks if possible and focus on preserving their capital rather than on growth in value. A will can also be a good idea at this point, and with that, you've made it. Congratulations on your retirement. Now you can enjoy yourself. Let me know in the comments below when you plan to retire and whether you're satisfied with your wealth today. I'm looking forward to the exchange, and with that, I wish you good returns and see you next time.